Okay, let's just dive right into this. Today, we're exploring one of the most fascinating and honestly, one of the most complex realities of our modern world, how completely different belief systems actually interact with each other. I mean, we live in an era where we're more hyper-aware of the sheer plurality of religious traditions than ever before. But how do societies actually manage this day to day? And on a deeper level, how do philosophers even begin to make sense of all these conflicting claims to absolute truth? Well, in this explainer, we're going to unpack the big overarching concept of religious pluralism. We'll start with the plain facts on the ground, move through some seriously deep philosophical responses, and finally look at the very practical steps required for actual, peaceful coexistence.
Now, to give you some context, the insights we're walking through today are pulled directly from academic source material out of IGNOU, specifically focusing on the philosophy of religion. We are going to unpack some pretty dense academic frameworks about how diverse societies function, but don't worry, we're going to take it step by step. And just to be totally clear up front, we aren't here to take sides or debate theology. Instead, we're going to use these structured academic lenses to impartially understand how human beings navigate a world filled with deeply held, yet often totally contradictory, beliefs.
So here is our roadmap for the explainer. First, plurality versus pluralism. Second, the conditions for religious pluralism. Third, philosophical responses. Fourth, resolving conflicting truth claims. And finally, number 5, practical steps for coexistence.
Let's get right to it. Section 1. Plurality versus pluralism.
To kick things off, we really have to ask ourselves what we actually mean when we throw these terms around. You know, it's super easy to walk through a diverse, bustling city and think, wow, look at all this pluralism. But academically speaking, we need to zoom in and draw a really specific distinction here, one beautifully articulated by the scholar Diana Eck. The crucial thing to understand is the difference between these two words. Plurality is just the plain fact of diversity. It's colorful, it's splendid, but it's totally passive. You can literally just sit back and observe plurality without it ever affecting your life. Pluralism, on the other hand, that's active. It's the active engagement with that diversity. It requires actual participation, genuine dialogue, and the deliberate cultivation of a public space where totally different people actually encounter one another. Basically, plurality is just a statistic, while pluralism is a conscious societal achievement.
Moving on to Section 2, Conditions for Religious Pluralism.
So if pluralism is an active achievement, you're probably wondering what specific societal environments actually allow this kind of active engagement to thrive, or conversely, cause it to die. Because it definitely doesn't happen in a vacuum. It requires a very specific set of conditions. Let's look at the juxtaposition here. To promote pluralism, you absolutely need freedom of religion, just a fundamental baseline right for different groups to worship publicly under a common law. But you also need mutual respect, which interestingly often comes from non-literal views of tradition, focusing on shared fundamental principles instead of obsessing over marginal differences. On the flip side, pluralism is severely hindered by exclusivism. That's the belief that only one path is true and literally all others are false, which historically speaking completely shuts out dialogue. State atheism also completely crushes it by banning religion entirely. And even preferential treatments, like a state implementing specific laws that give special rights to one group over others, actively destroy the equal playing field that genuine pluralism requires.
All right, Section 3, Philosophical Responses to Pluralism.
This brings us to a massive, frankly fascinating intellectual hurdle. How do thinkers respond when multiple, completely distinct religions all step up and claim to have the absolute exclusive truth? Well, historically, the most common response is exclusivism, the view that there can only be one true religion and the rest are just misleading or completely false. But philosophers look at this and apply what's called a hermeneutic of suspicion. They neutrally point out a really glaring issue, the accident of birth. I mean, let's think about the non-rational arbitrariness of this for a second. A person born in Thailand is very likely Buddhist. Someone born in Italy is likely Catholic. Someone in Iran is likely Muslim. If ultimate salvation depends entirely on finding the one exclusive truth, it's philosophically highly problematic that this saving truth is essentially a geographic lottery, right? It implies that the ultimate truth is only known to a minority of the human race purely by the sheer luck of where they happen to be born.
Uncomfortable with that whole geographic lottery concept, many contemporary thinkers shift over to pluralist views, and we can neutrally map these into 3 major philosophical camps. Camp 1 is transcendent unity. This is the claim that all historical religions are actually just different manifestations of one core universal religion. Camp 2 is complementarians. This suggests that a supreme reality reveals different complementary aspects of itself to different cultures, which eventually leads to a convergent spirituality. And then Camp 3 is radical diversity. This one argues that traditions are entirely unique and independent. There's no underlying unifying core at all, and the ultimate realities they describe are just fundamentally different. So each of these camps is uniquely trying to reconcile diverse belief systems but without playing favorites.
Let's actually look a bit closer at that first camp, transcendent unity, championed by thinkers like Fridtjof Schuon and René Guénon. They have a brilliant way of illustrating this. They make a super sharp distinction between esoteric and exoteric religion. So, the esoteric is the inner, mystic core of a religion. They argue this core is identical across all faiths. It's this shared, deep experience of the ultimate reality. The exoteric, however, is the outer shell. It's the culturally conditioned concepts, the doctrines, the specific imagery, the lifestyle. According to them, all our disagreements and conflicts, they only happen on this outer, exoteric level. Meanwhile, true unity quietly exists at the esoteric core.
Which leads us to Section 4, Resolving Conflicting Truth Claims.
So that esoteric inner unity sounds great, but it poses a huge new challenge. What happens if people's mystical experiences actually contradict each other? Whose description is the true one? Some philosophers try to solve this using evidence. Specifically, they argue we should treat religious experience as a form of valid evidence by invoking the principle of rational credulity. In our everyday lives, we naturally trust our physical senses, right? We trust our sight and our hearing, unless we have a specific, undeniable reason to doubt them, like if we know we're hallucinating. The argument here is that we should apply this exact same principle impartially to religious experience. If someone has a profound, life-altering awareness of a divine reality, shouldn't we trust it as valid knowledge, just the way we trust our physical sense experience?
But wow, does this raise a massive rhetorical question for us? Can a subjective, intensely personal religious experience actually settle objective, real-world philosophical disagreements? Think about it. If two people have deeply profound yet entirely opposite subjective experiences, is there any way either of those experiences can be used as objective proof for a universal truth?
Well, critics immediately jump on this and point out the major flaws in treating religious experience like everyday physical sense experience. They generally raise two massive objections. First off, sense experience is universal and compulsory. Literally, everyone sees the rock falling if they are standing right there. But religious experience? It's optional. It's confined to a very limited number of people, and it can't just be reproduced and confirmed by anyone at any time. Second, and probably most importantly, it produces deeply incompatible descriptions. A Hindu, a Muslim, and a Buddhist might all absolutely claim their religious experiences validate their beliefs, and yet their descriptions of the divine, or even the lack thereof, are entirely different from one another. Because it fundamentally fails to produce a universally agreed-upon description, critics argue that religious experience simply cannot be used to resolve conflicting truth claims.
And that brings us to our final part, Section 5, Practical Steps for Coexistence.
So if deep philosophy really struggles to prove one objective truth, how do we actually go about our lives interacting with people whose beliefs we fundamentally disagree with? We have to transition from abstract philosophical debates in ivory towers to the very concrete reality of living side by side in a diverse world. The academic frameworks we're looking at point us to 3 actionable takeaways for real societal coexistence. And this perfectly illustrates that progression from passive plurality to active pluralism we talked about earlier. Step 1 is religious toleration. That is simply deciding, on a baseline level, not to use force to change what we dislike. Step 2 goes a bit further into appreciating diversity. This is where we recognize that we might actually learn something or correct our own blind spots by allowing alternative views to exist around us. And then step 3 is interreligious dialogue. This is cooperative, highly positive interaction aimed at mutual understanding and building a better world, but crucially, without necessarily trying to fuse everyone's beliefs together.
To really hammer home that first step, toleration, we can look back to the philosopher John Locke. He argued from a purely pragmatic standpoint that trying to force someone to change their religion isn't just a terrible idea for civil peace, it's completely irrational. It is literally self-contradictory. As he put it, I cannot be saved by a religion that I distrust and by a worship that I abhor. True faith, by its very nature, requires inward sincerity. You can certainly force someone to act a certain way on the outside, but you can never, ever coerce the human mind into genuine belief. Therefore, tolerance isn't just nice, it is the only logically viable path forward.
But we can actually move way beyond mere tolerance by adopting a concept called epistemological humility. That sounds like a mouthful, but it's basically just the recognition that human comprehension, our actual ability to fully grasp the ultimate, massive nature of reality or the divine, is inherently limited. We are fallible. When we finally accept that we might not have the complete, perfect, 100% picture, it changes everything. It allows us to positively appreciate diversity rather than just grudgingly tolerating it through gritted teeth. It completely opens the door to the idea that interacting with someone who holds an entirely different worldview might actually give us incredible new insights into our own. Which brings us to our final thought for today. We've looked at the hard facts of plurality, the strict active definitions of pluralism, the wild philosophical debates over who actually holds the ultimate truth, and the absolute logical necessity of tolerance. But ultimately, when we wake up every day in a world full of beautifully complex yet wildly conflicting truths, is epistemological humility just the simple, honest admission that we don't know everything, our best, and maybe our only true guide to genuine coexistence? It is a pretty profound question to leave you with, and honestly, it's the very foundation of any real interfaith dialogue. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you next time.